пару гарних.
Добрий вечір. Good evening. On behalf of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, I am very pleased to welcome everyone to this evening's webinar, Ties That Bind, Canada, the United States, and Ukraine. Canada and the United States are united by a long shared history. Canadians have no closer friends, no greater allies than the American people. We are not close only because of geography, but more importantly, because of a shared commitment to the universal values of freedom, democracy, and the inalienable dignity of each individual. Канада та Сполучені Штати об'єднані довгою спільною історією. В канадців немає ближчих друзів, більш надійних союзників, ніж американський народ. Ми близькі один до одного не тільки завдяки географії, а завдяки спільної відданості універсальним цінностям – свободи, демократії та невід'ємного права кожної людини на гідність. And that, I think, is why Canada and the United States are Ukraine's closest friends. It is not only because many Canadians and Americans trace their roots and heritage to Ukraine, it's because freedom, democracy, and the inalienable dignity of each individual unite the Ukrainian people in their brave struggle against Russian imperialist aggression. І це, мені здається, є причиною, чому Канада та Сполучені Штати Америки сьогодні є України найближчі друзі, не тільки тому, що чимало канадців та американців мають своє коріння та спадщину в Україні, а тому, що свобода, демократія та невід'ємне право кожної людини на гідність об'єднують український народ в його хоробрій боротьбі проти російської імперіалістичної агресії. Це ті зв'язки, які пов'язують нас. This week, Canada commemorates a dark page in our history. Our country mourns the memory of 215 innocent lives, 215 missing children whose remains were found on the grounds of the former Kamloops residential school. This is a shameful period in Canada's history and one which we must work harder to atone for. The early Ukrainian pioneers in Canada owe their survival to the Indigenous people of Canada. It is our duty to work with them toward truth and reconciliation. I therefore ask our friends in Canada, the US, Ukraine, and around the world joining us this evening to pause for a moment in memory of these 215 children. Thank you. And returning to the international arena, it is vital that our countries coordinate efforts and continue to display unity in support of Ukraine, whether it's the Canadian and American military training missions, or support for civil society in Ukraine, or continuing to support democratic reforms to which Ukraine has committed and the Ukrainian people and international partners expect. Canadian and American support for Ukraine is most effective when it's synchronized and harmonized, and it's in this spirit that we propose today's event. In the coming months, there are many important events: the G7 summit, the NATO summit, President Biden's meeting with Putin, the Ukraine Reform Conference in Vilnius, the Crimean platform in Kyiv. I'm sure we will discuss these and many more issues with our guests this evening. Тепер попрошу Андрія Футея, президента Українського конгресового комітету Америки, представити нашу гостю. Andriy, I turn the floor over to you to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Leslie. On behalf of the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, I thank our distinguished panelists, the esteemed ambassadors for participating in today's panel discussion, as well as our Canadian colleagues for introducing, for suggesting, for organizing, for spearheading, and for jointly organizing with us this presentation. Thank you, Lesya. Thank you, Ihor. We should be doing many of these together more often. Ambassador Oksana Markarova is well known to many of us. Her dedication and commitment are an example to all of us. As we all know, she formerly served as Minister of Finance from 2018 to 2020. What's amazing about the ambassador is that from the very first moment she stepped on America's soil, when she landed in Washington, D.C., she immediately ran to work. And I mean ran to work. She did not walk. She ran to work. Her days don't have enough hours, as she has already met with administration officials, members of the United States Senate and House of Representatives, her fellow colleagues in the diplomatic corps, as well as numerous community activists and representatives of our organizations. She has spent a tremendous amount of time talking to our activists from throughout the entire United States, be it virtually in Washington be it in person in Washington or virtually throughout the country. I thank her for her spirit of cooperation and coordination as we address the continued Russian aggression and priorities for our Ukrainian American community and Ukraine, which includes such important issues as continued US military support, implementing the congressionally mandated Nord Stream 2 sanctions, and implementing a membership action plan for Ukraine's membership in NATO. Ambassador, we are honored to hear from you today.
Дякую, Андрію. Вітаємо, пані посол. It is now my honor to introduce His Excellency Andriy Shevchenko. Ambassador Shevchenko was appointed Ukraine's ambassador to Canada in 2015. Prior to his appointment, he had an accomplished career as a journalist, politician, civic activist, and human rights defender. During the Orange Revolution in 2004, he worked as a journalist on Channel 5, one of the few Ukrainian TV channels broadcasting the truth about the revolution. He was then elected a member of Ukraine's Verkhovna Rada 3 times in 2006, 2007, and 2012. He chaired the Rada's Free Speech Committee and sponsored more than 60 bills, including Ukraine's law on access to information. In 2013 and 14, he was an active participant in the Revolution of Dignity. Welcome, Ambassador Shevchenko. And finally, I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator, Roman Vashtruk, former ambassador of Canada to Ukraine from 2014 to 2019. Roman was a leader among ambassadors in Kyiv. With his depth of knowledge of Ukraine, he was a trusted advisor in the diplomatic corps, the dean of the G7 ambassadors. Ambassador Vashtruk practiced diplomacy with integrity, openness, sincerity, accessibility, and above all, optimism. He articulated the need for a strong Canada-Ukraine relationship, both with government, the media, and to the general public. Roman began his career at the Department of External Affairs in 1987, serving in many posts, including as Canadian ambassador in Belgrade, covering Serbia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. Today, we will enjoy his company and watch a master practice the art of diplomacy. Romane, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Merci and дякую, Лесю. In a prep conversation with my 2 ambassadorial friends, they warned me, you're not working anymore, so you can allow yourself to kind of rattle on there, but I'll try and keep myself in check and under control. It's an honor to moderate this conversation with 2 friends, and those are friends not just in the Facebook sense of the word, with whom I've worked closely while posted in Kyiv and still stay in touch. We'll have about a combined half hour of conversation and about 20 minutes for Q&A. Please write down your questions in the appropriate Zoom tab at the bottom of your screen. And also a reminder that we have simultaneous interpretation on the channel with the globe sign. Є симультанний переклад на українську мову. Внизу побачите глобус, там ховається українська мова. Now, both of our ambassadors come by their more formal titles: Ambassador Extraordinary, Ambassador Plenipotentiary, Excellency, honestly, through their many past accomplishments, which you heard about, and their present endeavors. A lot of topics to cover: Russian aggression, Secretary of State Blinken's visit, Ukraine's EU and NATO membership push, Nord Stream 2, Crimean platform, sanctions, peace talk formats, rule of law, where is it? Combating Russian disinformation, can our parliaments cooperate more? We'll try and cover most of those, and I try to invite our two speakers to identify those areas where community-supported or encouraged Canada-US and broader transatlantic cooperation could help Ukraine and those countries and individuals interested in helping it thrive and succeed. As gracious Canadian hosts, we'll give the floor first to Ambassador Markarova. Зрештою, вона новоприбула, а посол Шевченко вже старий канадієць. Так що так то є. So we'll ask Ambassador Markarova. In April, we saw this huge clanking military buildup around Ukraine. It was described in the media as saber rattling, but there was a lot more than sabers that were in motion then. It did not turn into direct military aggression. There was a kind of international sigh of relief, but not so much relief in Ukraine. And we hear today, for example, from the Russian defense minister that he's creating 20 new units along the western border, meaning targeting Ukraine. How are you conveying that sense and sensibility to people in Washington, and are you finding that they get it?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, if I may open with thanks to Ambassador Shevchenko for this idea, and to Ambassador Waschuk, who agreed to moderate this, but also for our Hromadas and Pan Andriy for a great presentation of myself. I believe that this is a very important event, and I believe it's not just another webinar that we are having, but it's actually a starting of a new format of deeper cooperation between Ukraine, Canada, and the US, which we together with our Hromadas can push forward. Because just to mention briefly at the beginning that the US is definitely our strategic partner number one for Ukraine. Canada is definitely our strategic friend number one. As good people stay together, countries with the same values definitely should stay together. And it's especially true today, as you said, when Ukraine is at the forefront of this battle for not only our dignity and our independence and territorial integrity, but also for democratic values in Europe and for the security of the whole region. So I'm positive that our three countries can do much more being together as the group. And I'm sure that this is the start of this new day, not only in our relations with the US, but also of this new format between us and Canada. This is especially true, as you have said today, because we see, first of all, it's the 8th year of our war. It's hard to remember and imagine for some people who are not involved with it on a daily basis, but this is the longest war in Europe in the past century. I mean, even the World War II was shorter. So we have seen this recent build-up, which is very worrisome. It's not only build-up of the military power, equipment, and personnel at our border, but it's also, as we see, the increased presence in the Black and Azov Sea, which is also disturbing. So I believe that it's important. We're very thankful for the United States and for other allies and partners for reacting promptly. The build-up of the military has stopped, but even though some of the equipment and personnel have pulled from there, it's still much more than it used to be before. So again, if you take into account that Crimea is still illegally annexed, if you take into account that part of Donetsk and Lugansk is still illegally occupied, and the rights of our citizens on both territories are violated, they're persecuted, they're in prisons, you know, Crimean Tatars, Ukrainians, all other nationalities. This is very worrisome. And of course, this is one of the main topics of our discussions here, as I'm sure it's one of the topics of the discussions in Canada and with all of our strategic partners. So therefore, this is the time for us to discuss not only how to react to these particular situations, but to discuss the institutional solutions to it, institutional security solutions. That's why our plans with regard to NATO are so important, because ultimately this is the institutional solution. So we have great support from I've been here a little bit more than a month. So again, I'm a very new ambassador. But everyone I talk to here, from administration to both chambers of Congress, the Friends of Ukraine do understand it, and we hear their strong positions, and we will be building up the coalition for Ukraine here, that we not only can counteract of these buildups, but actually work towards the sustainable peace solution and to Ukraine as the future member of the European Union and NATO.
Thank you. Ambassador Shevchenko, you just spent 2 hours today talking to Canadian parliamentarians about many of these same issues. How attuned are they to this, and how aware are they of what Canada's doing to help the Ukrainian armed forces?
Well, the help is extraordinary, while there are always some more things which can be done. But I think when we talk about this Russian escalation, probably it's the right time to switch a little bit into the reflections mode, not just because it's over, because it's far from being over, but because we do need to draw some conclusions from this situation. My first observation is that I was amazed with this quick switch of temperature which we witnessed. It taught us that it can get very physical very quickly. So we can spend months and years debating the nuances of the Normandy peace talks. And then we can, in days, only in several days, we can switch to something very different. When we count the tanks and armored vehicles, when we look at the military maps, and when we try to measure how many kilometers is between Voronezh and the Ukrainian border. So it can get very physical very quickly, and we should not forget about that for a single day, for a single moment. My second thought about this is that, again, it's far from being over. And I think the Russians are very clear that they want to keep their deployments and the heavy weaponry along the Ukrainian border. So even as we speak, there is a very clear threat towards Ukraine. There are different military scenarios behind it. It's far from being over. Thirdly, I think it's very important for us to see the situation not as a bilateral issue between Ukraine and Russia. In fact, nothing between Russia and its any given neighbor is bilateral. It's always about wider context. And if we think about this escalation, if we take a look at what is happening in Belarus, in Moldova, if we look at the military buildup in the Arctic, if we think about the cyber attacks on the American soil, this all should give us a very clear understanding that we are dealing with a well-coordinated, multi-layer Russian operation to destabilize the free world, to challenge the free world, and to break the existing international order. My final conclusion is that I think Putin has badly miscalculated the Western reaction. And in many senses, that was the result of enormous effort by Ukraine and by the Ukrainian Armada across the world. Which brings me to the final thing which I wanted to say here, that I'm very thankful to all those who helped organize this event. And to be fair, before I reached out to Ambassador Markarova about this, it was Lesia Chychi of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress who came up to us with this idea to have this joint event. And what a pleasure it is to share the screen with all of you. I would join these special greetings to Ambassador Markarova. We know each other from the times when we both studied at the Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. For the last several years, we were more concerned with how to utilize Oksana's talents for the benefit of Canada-Ukraine relations. She visited Canada with Prime Minister Groisman and with President Zelensky. So now it's even a greater pleasure to see Oksana successfully launching her posting south across the border. Good luck.
Thank you.
Great. Well, and I think you're actually both equally young, which would explain why you're both so energetic.
Roman, you just called me an old Canadian, so I just
well, but
I'm trying to make sense out of all this.
That's in terms of your experience here, but you're equally young in terms of vivacity and energy. NATO, the institutional solution that Ambassador Markarova had mentioned. This is an opportunity for me to maybe steal a question from the Q&A from David Kilgore, a longtime Canadian foreign policy practitioner, who's asking, well, who and what is stopping Ukraine from joining NATO? And I would add, what's being done about it now?
Well, first of all, let's go back to 2008. And a lot of time has passed since the summit where we should have, together with Georgia, received map, and we're still working to get it. Clearly, let me focus on what is different now and why I think this time we are much better prepared for it, and why together with NATO we can be stronger, and NATO could be stronger with us in the region. So if you compare with 2008, there was a big push from Ukraine, but every poll in 2008 have been clear that Ukrainian population not only didn't share this, but they didn't really understand the necessity or did not have enough information about NATO. This is the first time, I think, during the past almost 30 years of our recent independence, that the majority of Ukrainians actually support our accession into NATO. So this is first very important part, that our population, our people demanded, wanted, and supported. The second part is actually it's in our constitution now. So not only our people support it, but it's also in our main law. There is a clear stipulation that Ukraine is aspiring to be the member of the European Union, and that we also want to be a part of NATO. So I think it's not only what our people want, it's also mandated by our legislation. And third, and very important, our cooperation with NATO is so deep now. We have the EOP status. We just recently adopted the annual plan. Our armies are working on the interoperability, and our battle-tested army is not where it was during the past 30 years, the previous 30 years. So plus, again, we all know that NATO is not only about military reforms, it's also about democratic reforms, it's also about the wider reform context. And I think here also many people would agree that during the past 7 years, Ukraine has done more reforms than during the past 22 years before that, but also more than any Eastern European, for that matter, Western European country has done in this short period of time. So if anything, I think we are ready, our people are ready. And this is important not only for Ukraine, but it's also very important, I believe, for the alliance, because we, together with our experience, together with our army, together with our transformation in Ukraine, and all the opportunities that are in Ukraine, can add a lot to NATO, as well as get this institutional solution for the security of Ukraine and of the region.
Thank you. Maybe then just a quick follow-up with you on Secretary Blinken and his visit to Ukraine and the fallout from that. And I'll just foreshadow for Ambassador Shevchenko, Crimean platform is something that we can think ahead to in August. But in terms, Secretary Blinken visited, we have the NATO summit coming up now and the Biden-Putin summit. Have the right conclusions been drawn from the Secretary of State being in Kyiv? in terms of what you're seeing, hearing, feeling about preparations for that summit in Geneva?
Well, first of all, the visit has been very successful. I think we were one of the first countries Secretary Blinken visited with a full visit. Had very productive discussions with both the president, prime minister, and of course, Minister Kuleba. And there were constant, a couple of phone calls and the meeting during in Europe between our ministers and minister and secretary. I think we kind of compared our notes and we agree on the majority of them, from the military assistance to support of our unwavering support actually for our fight and independence, and discussed important reforms which are important for Ukraine. They are needed for our transformation, including the judicial reform and anti-corruption and others, but also the reforms which are important for our international partners and which they have supported for many years. So again, there is a lot to develop from that visit, and we are doing it. If you take a look, there are contacts at every level, and this early on. Again, I know there are talks always in the press, and the focus is always more on who called and who met. And I remember all the pressure that was discussed in March, but then now after that we had 2 calls between the Minister of Defense and the Secretary of Defense, a number of calls between our Department of State and our ministry. Just today there was a discussion between the Minister of Finance and the First Deputy Secretary of Treasury, and on and on and on. You know that the strategic partnership works well when it's not only the presidents who talk to each other, it's not only the ministers who talk to each other, but when all formats are fully in place. And while the US is still also early on at the administration, and there are a number of people who are not appointed yet, everyone who is on the position, we are actively working with them. So again, yes, there are difficult topics now, Nord Stream 2, where we are working very actively with our partners. We are submitting all the information that we have on all the malign companies and people and vessels. And we were very happy that 4 companies and 13 vessels in total have been recently sanctioned. Of course, we're expecting more of them, including this Swiss company, to be sanctioned, as unfortunately we do not think there will be any change of the Russian behavior in that sense. But again, this all is a discussion, and this discussion continues, and I think we are we'll get it there.
Okay. Now Crimea. This is another priority for President Zelensky. He is inviting international partners to come to Ukraine to talk about Crimea, to keep it on the international front burner. What's the thinking behind it, Ambassador Shevchenko, and what are you hearing about outreach that's happening around that?
I believe this should be a priority not just for President Zelensky or for Oksana or myself, but it should be a big priority for all those who share our concern with the security situation. And I think it's been long overdue, an initiative like this. And obviously, many of us have realized for a long time that Crimea has been overlooked by the Normandy format, and we should have done something like this so much earlier. When we tell about this initiative to our Canadian counterparts, we remind of the free world's experience with the Baltic nations. At some time, there was this very right decision to adopt the non-recognition policy after the Russian occupation of the Baltic countries. And eventually, those nations who chose that policy, they learned that they were on the right side of history. In fact, the history arrived to their doors at some point. So that's exactly what will happen with Crimea. And I think it's very important to bring together the nations which share non-recognition policy towards the occupation of Crimea. Canada has been very supportive of this initiative. And It started a long time ago, at the days when you, Mr. Waschuk, were in Kyiv. And we actually, not just we expect Canada and the United States of America to be well represented at the inaugural event in August, but we expect Canada to be in a leading role on many avenues of cooperation. I can give one very practical example. It's the sanctions policy. If you think about the sanctions procedures in many countries, they're so different. Think about the European sanctions tools, or the US and Canada. All these friends of Ukraine, they adopt these sanctions decisions in different way. They monitor the situation on the ground in different way. And they have very different procedures when it comes to implementations. Actually, many parties of this process don't have any mechanism to monitor implementation of sanctions. So I think it's a very natural avenue of cooperation when like-minded countries can sit together, exchange their best practices on sanctions, and invent very good mechanism what to do with this. And I'll tell you this, I'm afraid Russia is not the last country that we should apply sanctions against. So probably we will be able to invent some very good mechanism of cooperation, which we can apply in some other parts of the world. Finally, I'll just say that the bad regimes, the authoritarian regimes, they show us how quickly they can cooperate and how effectively and efficiently they can cooperate. So I think we should show them that we can do it even much better. I have this quote in front of me. It's from 1919. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. So I guess this quote reminds us that we should be creative. We should be open to different tools. And let's think that 1919 was the time when we had another pandemic of the global scale. So we see so much parallels with this.
And
just to add, if I may, on the Crimea platform, agreeing with everything that Andriy has said, I think, you know, it's what is very important about the platform and the inaugural event, which is going to be in August, that it's both a forum on which we can discuss it, but it's also an instrument of how to get the Crimea back. So before, I mean, of course, there was all this non-recognition and there were discussions about it, and some countries have been more active than others. But now we have the toolbox, and the countries are joining this platform. And I'm sure that, again, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be probably not very quick, but this is the first step we are taking. And this is the first step on the road that will, you know, lead to the day when Crimea will return back home. And we know it because we see that the reaction from Russian Federation is very critical about it. I mean, they are openly saying it. And I'm also very happy that the United States not only already supported it, but also encourages other G7 partners to join and participate. So we all work and look forward to the first inaugural meeting, and then it's going to be a daily work of that platform until, you know, we succeed.
Okay, thanks. Maybe just briefly, Ambassador Markarova, you were among the co-founders of Ukraine Invest, the agency to bring investment into Ukraine. Some of those people who have come in and invested have concerns about rule of law. They're thinking, one day I own my company or I own my power connection. The next day it's gone, and courts are a bit wonky. What is being done? I think you had a briefings on this from President Zelensky before you left. What's being done to help fix the problems with Ukraine's courts?
Thank you very much. My favorite topic. You know, before I was in the Ministry of Finance, I spent many years in private equity business. So I have a first-hand experience in how to invest in Ukraine and what you can expect, all the good outcomes, but also not so good. And clearly, you know, the situation in Ukraine with regard to rule of law still requires a lot to be done. But again, if you compare to what it was even in 2014, the progress is definitely there. A lot has been done in Ukraine to improve the business climate, to improve the investment climate, to dramatically decrease the space for corruption, with the deregulation, ProZorro, and all other reforms. We hear it from all the businesses that are already on the ground. And if in 2014, 2015, every time we would go to the business associations, we would get the huge list of problems from them, starting from the VAT non-refunds to the problems with the tax police. I mean, the list was so long that you almost didn't know where to start. Now, a lot of this, many of these problems are resolved by the systemic solutions. Many of the problems already are addressed by legislative changes, which are already implemented. But now we clearly see which are those that are left, and rule of law is one of them. It's very high on the agenda of every business association that we ask. Now, that is not, that we also did something there. And as you know, you have been in the part of that reform when you were in Ukraine. We have restarted the Supreme Court, and that reform worked. And the Supreme Court that we have in Ukraine now, again, maybe not ideal, but none of the reforms is ideal. You have to work on these reforms for years. But the Supreme Court clearly shows much better quality of judicial decisions, and this view is shared by pretty much everyone, including all the business associations and others. Also, we have created the whole infrastructure on the anti-corruption. Now, of course, ordinary people and small businesses do not deal with the anti-corruption court, and they do not deal with the Supreme Court for the majority. They deal with the courts of the first and second instance. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the continued judicial reform. And there are a number of laws that are being reviewed. They're already in the parliament, on the highest commission of justice, on other bodies, essentially targeting how do we continue the reform and how do we continue the cleanup and empowering of the good judges and improving the judiciary in Ukraine. Now, having said that, we know that judicial reform is one of the hardest ones, not only in Ukraine. There are many countries who went through it, and it takes decades because it's not only about judicial change, it's not only about legislative change, it's not only about implementing it, it's about behavioral change. It requires everyone to not only participate on the part of the judiciary, but also business, people, for everyone. So what can we do while we are doing these reforms? And that's why we have created Ukraine Invest. While you are doing the reforms, we want to help the compliant business who already have business in Ukraine or who are thinking about being there. So that's why Ukraine Invest not only started in 2017, but very actively working now. And we're opening a new chapter of Ukraine Invest work with close cooperations between them and the embassies. And we will also have their representatives working together with us so that we can actually give this red carpet treatment, if I may say that, to companies that would like to expand. And together with another important reform in Ukraine, decentralization, which I think is one of the most successful reforms in Ukraine, and we don't talk about it. I don't hear about it more, but I think, if anything, that particular reform has created a number of very capable regional leaders in Ukraine and created a very right incentive from every company or every service that is created in the regions. Not only local budgets get the real estate tax and property tax as in any country in the world, but they get big portion of the personal income tax and the corporate income tax. So there is a direct incentive for the local government to actually attract investors, fight for them, and we already see it. We have a lot of companies that have opened their facilities in Western Ukraine specifically, all these automotive companies from Germany and some companies from France. My plan is significantly increase the number of the US companies and the size of investments of the existing companies, because I believe this is a very important part of reforms and transformation. If we can pair the changes and transformation with additional investments and immediate good results for the local budgets, which means direct results for the local communities, then we will have much stronger support by Ukrainian people for the reforms, which sometimes need more time to create these benefits, but with the direct investments, additional jobs in the regions, it can be easier. So again, yes, rule of law is very important. We will be working on that, but we all have to understand that it will take time, even if we do everything quickly and even if we stay the course, which is not, again, very easy in a democracy because you need to work with all the stakeholders, and democracy we do value in Ukraine. But if we can supplement and augment it with the increased investments, the reforms will be more successful and easier.
Now, we got about 15 minutes left. There are about 200 of us online. We've got 13 questions coming in the Q&A. 2 have already been more or less answered. I'm going to try and give them to you as snap questions, looking for either one of you to pick them up with a quick 30, 40 second answer. Now, these are complicated, some of them, but you can do it. So there's a question about, I guess you just answered the ones about fostering trade and business collaboration, so we'll consider those to already be answered. A question from Stefan Andrusiak. What is Ukraine doing internally to win the hearts and minds of residents inside the occupied areas? I think you've talked about Crimea, so I think maybe let's talk about Donbass briefly.
I can start. I think what we need to do is we should apply something that Gramsci described as optimism of the will and pessimism of the intellect, which means we should be persistent, we should be optimistic that sooner or later we will achieve what we need, but also we should be very realistic about the situation on the ground. There won't be an easy solution, and this battle for the hearts and minds is not going to be quick or easy.
What is very important to do is to fight the disinformation that they are constantly fed by the aggressor, and also provide them with the right information and the true information from us. And this is not easy, but this is what is the main focus now for the president and also for the Ministry of Information. So we're trying to get as much information there, and we're trying to block also as much disinformation sources that are poisoning our people's mind there.
Okay, now 2 military-related questions from Michael Hritzak and Stephanie Savin, asking about why has Ukraine not yet done more on interoperability in terms of the NATO working group, and also how much has Ukraine done to convince NATO that it will keep the secrets that might be shared with it?
Well, quick question on the interoperability. I think we're doing quite a number of things. Of course, there is this annual plan that the president just recently signed into action, and it's a very ambitious plan. So there is something to do every month. With regard to keeping the information, it's a more detailed and a more profound issue, not only for the military, but in general. This is what the Ministry of Digital Transformation on one hand, but also all the military and secret service and other ministries are focusing on. Because again, in some of the instances, we only started to rebuild these capabilities starting from 2014 and taking the malign interference in them, which was there before. But in general, I think, the focus of the military support from the United States is not only, the specific equipment or the trainings or everything for which we are very grateful, but also for, creating our own capabilities, including in cyber and everything else. So this is pretty much a focus.
Okay, and then there's another question from Yuri Yatskevich on a related theme, which is, can Ukraine obtain the status of major non-NATO ally to the US? What's been done? And to me, at least, if you get something called non-NATO, that doesn't quite fit very well with a thrust for NATO. But how is Kyiv seeing it through Washington now?
Excellent question, something that I answer a lot lately. Now, there are there is a status issue and there is the actual cooperation issue. So with regard to the status, our status is EOP partner with NATO, and this is what our aspiration is. We would like to become member of NATO. If you look at the MNNA as the major non-NATO ally, the 17 or 18 countries that have it, these are the countries that either do not plan or geographically or for other reasons cannot join NATO. So they have the status with the United States, but all of these statuses are very different, and they are all realized through the bilateral agreements with the United States. So while our idea is to stay, and it's in our constitution to be there, to have the status of the future NATO member, we also focus on the bilateral cooperation with the US, and this is something that we are discussing at the moment.
And
Okay,
Pane Romane, if you allow me, I
Sure.
just want to say that in Ottawa, what it looks like from Ottawa, and I think it's one of the situations where what we do and say in Washington and in Ottawa might be a little bit different in a good way. Here in Ottawa, we say that if there is one country or one region on the planet where Canada is already making a huge difference, that's Ukraine, because of the very much appreciated Canadian military deployment in Ukraine, this brilliant Operation Unifier, because of the very unique cultural ties between Ukraine and Canada, and because of this massive footprint in the field of international assistance. And in the case of Ukraine, Canada is included in all the possible major reforms on the ground. So that's why we expect Canada to be very vocal when in Brussels there is a conversation about the future of Ukraine and NATO. As I usually say, we want unifier commanders sitting in Brussels, and we want them to tell their comrades and their colleagues from other countries what is the benefit of having Ukraine in NATO, because no one or not too many countries on the planet, they know Ukraine as well as Canada does, and Canada should monetize, should use that knowledge, should use that experience for the benefit of NATO.
We of course mean politically, morally monetized. We would never think of anything else. A governance related question. You mentioned assistance from Stuart Goodings, who was one of the pioneers of Canadian public administration assistance. He's wondering, is enough being done in that area? Democratic reform, public administration, could we be doing more? That's a question to Ambassador Shevchenko.
Well, I think the support is tremendous. Also, to be fair, I think we should recognize that there are many people in Ukraine who would expect our Western friends to talk more to us before they start new development projects. I think in this world which changes so quickly, it's very important that countries like Canada and the US and our European friends, that they allocate their resources to the places, to the projects which are the most timely.
I felt a huge emotional embrace coming from Washington from Ambassador Markarova after all her negotiations with the World Bank and the IMF and the EBRD and many other institutions. So, how do you see assistance, and do major Western partners, in this case the US, actually understand the environment they're operating in?
Well, of course, I think during the past 7 years, the involvement of not only G7, but also IFIs in many reforms in Ukraine have been tremendous. Well, now with the change of administration here, and also with 7 years of reforms generated excellent results and also generated lessons which we have to learn. So I think the time now is actually to do some evaluation of some of the reforms, whether we have got the results that we planned for, and if not, then why, and also do some refocusing on some of them. Now, again, the target is still the same. We're still moving in the right direction, but on the level of the implementation, it's always good with partners to sit down and discuss and see whether the environment has changed also, that we have to fine-tune some of them. So I think there's a lot of work there to be done together with partners in order to make the reforms more effective. Now, a little note, because we are together talking with our hromadas, I believe that we are not using or utilizing this excellent resource, if I may say so, that we have in many important reforms on the ground, especially in the corporate governance reform. I mean, we do have remarkable people in both US Ukrainska Hromada and in Canada that have years of experience in many areas, including banking and medical and energy and others. But in addition to this vast experience and high integrity, they also have the love for Ukraine in their hearts. And I think this who we need to engage more in, especially this boards where we are looking for the international independent board members. So this is something that we already are discussing with Hromadas, and this is where we will be very active. And using this venue, I would like to encourage everyone who's willing to do that, work with us, let us know, so that we actually can mobilize this talent for a work in Ukraine. Because again, this corporate governance reform is not only very important, but it's also very difficult. This is the reform that requires lots of behavioral transformations, and nobody can do it better than true friends who speak the same language with us and have the same love in their hearts.
So there you go. So an opportunity for listeners to dust off their CVs and think about whether they should be commenting from the sidelines or are willing to mix it up in corporate governance in Ukraine. Thank you for that. Actually, maybe a follow-up, Ambassador Markarova. You've been a minister, so there's a question here from Maria Iscu in California. Can you share any details about the two ministers who resigned and the health minister getting fired? Now, of course, Ukraine is a democracy and governments change. How are we supposed to interpret the rotation, and does that open up any new opportunities?
Well, you answered the question in asking it. We are a democracy. Ministers are political positions. So the parliament, prime minister and president, if they see the need to, and the better candidates to lead that area or another, and if the parliament supports it, then we have the new ministers. So again, I believe that it's important for the cabinet of ministers to work as a team. So there are different reasons sometimes for changes in the cabinet, again, as it may happen everywhere. But I think the main point there is to progress on the reforms, to work, and we see that the three ministers that came into the position, they are also not new. And Minister of Health has been the chief doctor, so he has been working for quite some time. The first deputy, first vice prime minister and minister of economy has been also working in the financial fiscal system before. So again, as we say in Ukraine, every change is for the better. So we just have to make it for the better.
Got it. Speaking of changes, question from Andriy, who may already be on a flight, but he left us a question. He's excited about the prospect of dual citizenship for Ukrainians living in friendly countries. Can either of you comment on where that's at and whether it'll become a reality?
Well, we heard this during the inaugural speech of President Zelensky, which probably well reflects that it's his personal priority. Unfortunately, I think this very important issue has become a victim of bureaucratical and political hardships and difficulties. I think we are still to find the proper way how to balance the interests. And I think it's very important for Ukraine to recognize that Hromada wants not just an easy path for citizenship, but it wants to have a full access to public service and to the electoral positions. And we should realize that in Ukraine, not everyone is happy about that. So there'll be some discussion about this. But again, I think we can witness a major progress on this issue. And I'm pretty much sure that in our lifetime, we'll see this happening. If we want to be successful in the 21st century, if we want to use all the talent, which is so obviously lies in the Hromada, we should go ahead with this.
Great. Lida Lada, who is a Canada-US person in her own right, asks, how can our two Hromadas help together? Is there any cooperation between the US Congressional Ukraine Caucus and the Canada-Ukraine Parliamentary Friendship Group, whether it's coordinating on things like Magnitsky sanctions or maybe coordinating political or technical assistance for Ukrainian legislators, the parliament?
I can start with this. That's exactly what we discussed with the Canadian parliamentarians just a couple of hours ago, and I can say that here on the Canadian side there is an obvious appetite for this parliamentary cooperation between parliamentarians from Canada and US who are interested in the events in Ukraine and in the neighborhood. So I would strongly encourage all those who listen to us today and who talk to parliamentarians, who talk to decision makers. I strongly encourage us to work in that direction. And I think we can easily find some very practical things where we can cooperate, Ukraine, Canada, and the US, in the field of defense and security. Canada and the US already cooperate obviously a lot. We have 5 eyes. Maybe Ukraine, it would be difficult for Ukraine to become a 6th eye, but we could be an eyebrow for now. Then we have this Quint format, which is 5 nations which closely cooperate with Ukraine and with Ukrainian armed forces, and Canada and the US are already members of that format. Both US and Canada train our soldiers and officers, so there are very natural ways to cooperate. If we think about sanctions, we already see some cooperation, and it can be done so much better. Also in the field of development. And finally, I think we should also it's okay to see some differences in how we deal with Washington and with Ottawa. And there will be some differences. And in some cases, actually, there are fields where we could share some best practices. Like we already have the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, which works quite successfully. And I think it's something which Ambassador Markarova would like to see happen in one day between US and Ukraine. Also, we just launched this mobility working group between Canada and Ukraine, and it should explore how we can increase mobility of citizens between our 2 countries. Or also, we have this extraordinary Canada-Ukraine parliamentary program, which gives young Ukrainians an opportunity to spend some time in the offices of Canadian parliamentarians. Also, in the field of cultural events. So there might be some differences, and as we know, sometimes it's the Americans who win the NHL, and sometimes it's the Raptors who take the NBA title. Well, maybe this parallel would be better applied last year, not this year, but this happens. So I think there are very obvious avenues for cooperation, for exchange of best practices. Hromada is crucial because of this interconnectivity of the American and Canadian Hromada across the border. And yes, there might be some differences. And in this case, it's very good because sometimes Ottawa can do what Washington can't and the other way around.
Okay, and on parliamentary relations, what can Washington do, Ambassador Markarova?
Well, first of all, if you look in Ukraine, our countries do cooperate together in Ukraine. So pretty much any reform that you can take or any assistance from military to democracy, to the police reform, others, you immediately see the Canada and the United States playing prominent roles together, sometimes with other G7, together with the IFIs, but you almost always see the United States and Canada together in those. And I think, and again, when we look at the pictures from Ukraine now, which we follow very closely, we see our colleagues, ambassadors from the US and Canada being together at the front line and being together at the forefront of many reforms. So I believe that cooperation here between Hromadas, but also between our legislative bodies here is very important. The Ukrainian caucuses in Senate and Congress are very strong. They are growing. We see more people now and more senators and congressmen taking interest in Ukraine, because again, it's not only Ukraine, it's the region. Ukraine is the key for the prosperity and security of the Black Sea region. And a lot of people are realizing it here in the United States, and I'm sure that a lot of people are realizing it in Canada. So now if these 2 legislative bodies can cooperate more on the levels of the discussions with regard to their cooperation with Ukraine, that is going to be very beneficial. So I'm sure that together with Andriy, we will be doing everything possible to do it, but it's up for our Hromadas who are voters in both countries to actually also to encourage this cooperation, which can be very beneficial.
And sometimes or often thank the governments for what they do for Ukraine.
Exactly.
Because Hromada and all of us, we are very demanding, and it's the right way to do this. But also, I think it's very important to show some appreciation for what the US and Canada have been doing to support Ukraine.
Okay, we are in sports terms in overtime. But since nobody's actually physically stopping us, I think we'll add ourselves another 11 minutes. We'll call it injury time in soccer terms. And I think we'll go to a few more questions and then allow some a quick moment for the both of you to wrap up. I think Lesikichi will have a few parting words as well. We have a question, I think it's been partially answered as well, from Yuri Etskevich again saying, why is the human potential of the diaspora being underutilized? But I think the mentions about corporate governance and maybe other aspects as well as dual citizenship are issues that would help address that. But if you'd like to add anything to it, feel free. Maybe also then there's a question from Olesia Luciu-Andriovich from Alberta. What is a sensible way for people in Canada and the US now to help Ukraine in terms of COVID? What is actually helpful?
I can start. We should realize that in Ukraine, the immunization or the vaccination situation is far from being good. As of the moment, we have only about 5% of the population vaccinated. We're talking first dose only. And then we can also think more about the situation in the east of the country, where the medical infrastructure is destroyed or is in very poor shape. We are talking about the area along the front line and in the occupied territories. So I think Ukraine is, and especially the occupied territories, they can be just steps away from a humanitarian catastrophe. So we should be aware of that, even now when we're kind of like getting out of the woods here in Canada and in the US. So the truth is that Ukraine needs international support on this. We need vaccines. In Canada, Canada's approach that it shares or it's going to share its vaccines through the multilateral international initiatives. That means that it's not the most comfortable way for Ukraine. We should find some other ways how we can get enough vaccines to Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. Question from Zenon Plutichny. The investment nanny law has been passed. What are the next steps and how is Ukraine Invest going to be helping investors? You talked, Ambassador Markarova talked about the next phase. What does that mean for the individual investor?
Well, the investment stimulus law is pretty clear and easy to use. So all the investments that fall into the category and the criteria, are more than 10 million, and then all the criteria there can actually use it. And we already have a number of investors who are working with Ukraine Invest to utilize that stimulus law in order to get the benefits of being the early adopters and coming into Ukraine now. The large privatization is finally unblocked. The necessary legislation have been adopted. So the State Property Fund is preparing quite a number of large projects, not only the small privatization through Prozoro, which has been quite successful for several years already. But now the large objects are going to be up for privatization. And together with the stimulus law, it's a great opportunity for those who would like to participate in privatization to come. The third, we're working with a number of IFIs institutions, and I had very productive meetings with the US Exim Bank here, which now is open for business again in Ukraine. And they have quite significant resources for businesses to support, which would like to expand. So plus we have the World Bank, plus we have the IFC or others. So again, I would encourage everyone who is interested in thinking to contact the Ukraine Invest, contact our embassy. The economic diplomacy is something that President Zelensky is putting a great emphasis on, and this is one of the tasks that all of the ambassadors have been given. So please contact the embassy directly, and we would be happy to put you in contact, give you information, and also serve here as your help in to get into investment or business development in Ukraine.
Okay, a late breaking question here from George Salmanu. Land reform comes into effect July 1st of this year. What impact or opportunity does this have for people from the Ukrainian diaspora?
This is the land reform is a game changer. And I know we all, I mean, I was among the more liberal group that was pushing for a more liberal reform, but I think we all have to praise the president for pushing for this reform, which was not possible. And, you know, we dreamt about it during the past years, and now finally it's going to happen. This is the phase one. The market will slowly start opening, and hopefully as of October, the market will be there. It's very important for all the financial instruments to be in place so that our farmers who would like to buy the lands, because it's now open only for Ukrainian businesses and for Ukrainian individuals, Ukrainian farmers. But I believe that this reform will have a big impact on, in general, agribusiness in Ukraine. Not only it will add to the you know, GDP and others, but for those who would like to participate in the agribusiness, even the foreign-owned companies that would like to operate, to have finally Ukrainians who can own fully the land, buy the plots and rent it out according to the transparent rules, is going to create a much better conditions for actually people to lease long-term, to invest into the land and to increase the productivity. So now, I still, as a Ukrainian citizen, hope that this is the phase two and that we will be able to show that you know, this is successful and we will develop and deepen the land reform. But I believe that, you know, it's a game changer.
So basically, you'd have to reform the citizenship law first to allow people to become Ukrainian citizens for them to be able to buy the land at the moment.
Well, for our American and Canadian and all other Ukrainians, diaspora, yes.
Got it. Maybe just a quick one for Ambassador Shevchenko from Alex Komashchenko. Where is Ukraine on legalization of cannabis and cannabis-derived products? There's Zanadeusia Juravel do Babinych Konopel, but can that happen legally in Ukraine?
As of the moment, we're still watching closely the Canadian experiment, and we'll see what to do with this later.
So we can only get high on Ukrainian policy terms. Is that's what you're telling us?
You can always find some tricks.
Got it. Just a quick follow-up on Crimean platform. Have any countries agreed yet to participate in this happening? Asks Artem Hayenko.
Yes, and some of that has been in public. Some information we would keep it undisclosed for now, and we expect good representation both from Canada and the US.
Got it. Okay, well, I think that wraps it up. We weren't able to get through all the questions. We got through 20 of them, which is not bad. So now maybe I'll give both of you an opportunity to wrap up briefly, and then ask Lesya Hichi to wrap up the wrap-up.
Well, maybe I will start. Just wanted to thank everyone for spending their evenings with us. We know that this is important hour of your family life, and you are true friends and true family members of Team Ukraine if you decided to spend this important time with us. I would like to thank you for today, but also to thank and encourage everyone to stay tuned with us, because this is the first, but I'm positive, as we have discussed with Ambassador Shevchenko, it's a first of many practical steps and practical events and cooperation that we will be developing in the coming months and years, because we truly believe that together, three of us can do much more than each of us individually.
Thank you, Ambassador Shevchenko.
I'll just say that I have enjoyed this jazz jam format of this session. Second, you won't see that often Ukrainian ambassadors who work in different countries sitting together or sharing the screen in our case. So it takes a good Ukrainian hromada actually to help us to cooperate and coordinate, and I really like it. And finally, I would like to thank to everyone in the audience for being curious about Ukraine, for your curiosity, for your passion about Ukraine, and it's the right thing to do. And for your this passionate anxiety in the best possible way about the things which are happening in Ukraine. And I hope my Canadian friends will forgive me if I'll end with this wonderful, beautiful quote from a great American person. Martin Luther King said that our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. So I guess today or tonight we see people who are very passionate about things that matter, and thank you so much for that.
And just to add a little personal thanks also to what Andriy has said. First, many thanks, Andriy Futey, and all the Ukrainian Hromada here for everything you are doing. I mean, we are on a daily contact, and it's a lot, and I value it. And if I'm not replying every second with thank you, please know that it's a thank you every second. And very much thanks to Alexandra for this event and idea, and I'm sure for everything that Ukrainian community in Canada is doing. And Roman, as always, thank you very much for moderating it. We look forward to repeating it again.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been fun. And now a few closing words from the woman whose invitation no one can resist, apparently.
I wanted to thank you, ambassadors, current and former, for joining us in what Andriy Futey has declared to be the first of many such joint ventures. Andriy, I look forward to working with you to expanding this level of cooperation across many groups in our communities, both virtually and hopefully very soon in person. And Romana, I'm going to turn it back to you with the following admonition. You missed important subliminal messaging at Eurovision when Goe sang "See you, posivayu, konopelke."
Ah, correct. You can follow that up in the UCRDC's folk song archive with Marichka Marchik as well. But no, it's been a pleasure. It's allowed me to help come to terms with my status as an ex-ambassador. There's an adaptation period here, but certainly as well, I think it's fair to say that this sort of dialogue with the community would have been unimaginable a decade ago in terms of Ukraine Hromada relationships, and for that matter, the quality of representation that Ukraine has in Canada and the US. So I think this is something we can be proud of, and it is a significant change, and it is, I think, increasingly the way things are going in the future. This is the form of Ukrainian leadership that that we want to work with, and that we are willing to put in the volunteer time to support. Отже, дякуємо всім за участь, за вашу активність. The number of questions, and again, we'll need maybe next time to plan this for a longer session. And looks like there will be more. So, на все добре, à la prochaine, till we meet again virtually or in person. And thank you to Ivanka Plachotnyuk for interpreting за simultaneous переклад український, and to the UCC Ottawa team for putting this together technically. And now we're signing off.